Thanks for being on the panel. So this is really your opportunity, everyone, to ask questions to both AMP and Google Search. The reason why we did AMP and Google Search is because a lot of the questions that the AMP team gets are often about Google Search. So we wanted to take this opportunity to be able to answer both of those questions with the people that are uniquely capable. So we have Malte, we have Rudy, who just gave the talk. We have David again, who opened the keynote this morning. And then we have Richard. And then we have Arden, and Vamsi, and Rana. And yeah, so Malte, David, and Rudy actually work on AMP Core, so AMP, the product itself. And then Richard works a little bit on everything, I think, and assists with everything that comes up, and a great, well-known figure in the news space. So I'm very glad to have you on board. And then we have Arden and Rana, who support us from Google Search. And we have Vamsi, who is joining us also as part of the core team, specifically focused on AMP for Ads, who will also have a talk tomorrow. And now we'll just go into questions. So what we'll do is we have 2 lines. And now I forgot the names again. I think that one of them is Lindsay. Who's Lindsay? Right here. And then Melanie. OK, so please come up if you have a question and you have not asked it in the Slido, Dory, whatever it's called. And I'm just going to alternate between questions. So let's first pick a live question.
Hi, my name is Paul. I work on 538 and The Undefeated at ESPN. And we're news sites. And we have a lot of integration and touch points with Google. So we have Google News in the news sitemap. We have AMP pages. We have editors, picks, and there's validation tools and so on. And I'm wondering, has someone looked at taking a holistic approach to all of the ways Google looks at metadata and site integrations and so on to sort of consolidate those under one umbrella to make it easier to manage and to take the best practices from all the tools and apply them everywhere?
Sure, I can answer that question. We're trying. They are all either in one team within Google, my team, or they're or the ones that aren't. We're talking very, very heavily about trying to make sure that we're aligned on speaking with one voice to the webmaster ecosystem to make sure that we don't keep asking. We don't keep asking you to do different things.
And maybe that's a little better. There we go. Did anybody hear any of that, or do I need to repeat it? No. No, OK. So the answer is we're trying. We're getting a little better at this. All of the efforts that you described specifically right there are all in one team in Google, and we do all talk together. And those that aren't, we do try to coordinate very much across the company to make sure that we speak with one voice to webmasters. We haven't always done a great job at making sure that we're aligned with the things that we're offering to you as far as APIs and techniques to integrate with Google. But it's a big effort on our team at Google to get this to be in a lot better shape. I think we've made a big improvement. You've seen us start to unify around some of these organizing principles, AMP being one of them. AMP is a great way that you can publish content, ingest it into Google. Google will read it, rather, and it will use it in all of our different services. So AMP is supported in Google Play Newsstand, in Google News, inside Google Search, Google+, et cetera. And we're doing the same with things like the indexing API. We're trying to unify around very simple primitives so that you have one place to integrate with Google.
So next is a question from the Slido, which is, will the bug with analytics, so what they're referring to as incorrect bounce rates, incorrect unique sessions, be resolved, which is actually the most popular item on the list?
I can give it a little bit of context. So in particular, Google Analytics right now separates the user space between AMP and non-AMP traffic. And this has actually 2 effects. One people are sad about, the other one they cheer about. They're both wrong, which is because they're separate. If you go from AMP to web, you're a bounce on AMP, and you're a unique weather user on both. So if you look at your unique users, they go up, and you're like happy. And then you look at your bounce rate on your AMP pages, and it's not good. So both are basically incorrect, and that's basically on our side. The eBay talk today was actually exploring some solutions for this in the short term. For example, to use the referrer from AMP to essentially add to your, or subtract from the bounce rate to get a more accurate measurement. But this is obviously only like kind of a patch for this non-ideal behavior. And we are working on several mechanisms that are going to address this. So one is already launched, and it's more applicable to your own analytics. So the Google Analytics won't be able to use it. There's now a way to pass the so-called client ID from AMP on outbound links to your own site and into your native app, so you can track that traffic correctly. It's, again, not really usable by Google Analytics, so that team is kind of, is definitely looking at it and unclear as to what timing is on the horizon, but they're definitely trying to address it.
Right. Then we'll take a question here.
Hi, I'm Matt from the Financial Times. So one of the themes that came up in the session this afternoon about the web platform was the perceived centralization of AMP, and especially the Google AMP cache. So is there any kind of desire to treat other AMP caches as more first-class citizens? So for example, if Cloudflare has an article cached, then showing the lightning bolt on search results of that?
Yeah, let me take that as well. And this, it came kind of up in the web platform panel earlier. There's a few reasons why we are using our own AMP cache. The primary being that is actually a privacy reason. So the magic of instant loading, which requires you to load the document before the user expressed their intent to actually see it, is a very privacy-sensitive operation. So imagine you're going to Google and you're searching for something, and then you're actually clicking on Wikipedia. If a merchant that was selling this product was pre-rendered and now knows that you were interested into this category, you might see like remarketing ads for this around the web, even though you never went to their site, right? So one of the important invariants of pre-rendering is that the publisher of the content cannot know that Google performed this pre-rendering until the user expressed the intent that they actually want to see it. And so the way we do this is because we control the serving infrastructure entirely. We can, just not tell the publisher that this happened, and respectively have both the performance and the privacy in order. So I think maintaining this invariant is the primary thing in the way of scaling this out. I think it's actually not so much a centralization aspect. Since you're coming from Google, the cache is run by Google. They're both might go down, but they're more likely to go down at the same time. So you're coming from Google and you're staying on Google. I think it's from a serving point of view, it's a good way to do it.
And there's nothing saying that the content can't. Thanks.
There's nothing saying that the content can't be hosted anywhere you want. The important thing to remember is that the cache is really just a distribution cache. Content still lives on your site. You can choose to host your content however, including with Cloudflare and any other CDN you want. We don't view the cache really as a CDN in that way. It's just part of the delivery infrastructure of Google Search.
I'll take this.
So we don't generally discuss when or if anything would become a ranking factor in search. There's an awful lot of signals that go into determining how things rank inside Google Search, and we approach it extremely scientifically and methodically, and we do lots of experimentation and are constantly iterating on this. So I would never rule anything out, but I would tell you that right now AMP doesn't need to be a ranking signal in search because it's not a signal that materially changes how we would rank the results. It doesn't tell us much that isn't told by something else that's already one of the ranking signals. So we don't think we need AMP as a ranking signal. If that ever changed and we thought it would be a useful signal, we would incorporate it. Same thing's true if the phase of the moon somehow impacted search ranking. We're very open-minded when it comes to this. but it's not an important signal for us right now from a ranking perspective.
I'm curious, what is planned for the future of the Lightning Bolt badge? Is that something you guys plan to keep long term or sunset it after a period of time?
The Lightning Bolt badge in search? So I think it's pretty important that users know what to expect when they click a link, regardless of what it is. And we often label links in search, whether it's opening in an app or whatever, so that the users know when they tap what they're going to get. Today, the AMP experience is fairly different than the regular web experience, especially inside places like Google Search where there's a viewer. We render it super fast. It's pre-rendered. It opens typically in a place inside search in an embedded context. So we just want to inform the user that that's what they're going to get on the other side. We don't actually expect them to have any kind of connection with the Lightning Bolt. And we're not trying to build a brand around it. It's really just a signal that this is something different when you click on it. We do think that that same thing is valuable when it's across different properties, so they can get some learnings across this. But as long as it's something that is helpful to the users, we'll probably keep it.
Objectively, obviously, we'd like to get to the day where it's not necessary to have the Lightning Bolt link.
Yeah, it would be awesome if all pages were crazy fast and worked that way.
Yeah.
So this is a really deep ads question. So yeah, it's very specific to an ad server support, so I'm assuming you're talking about DFP. This is not possible today, but the DFP team is actively working on being able to request all ads on the same page in one go, instead of the way it works today, which is an ad request per ad. And once you're able to do that, competitive exclusions and master companion ads would just work. So real soon.
People love the ads.
Hi. On? Yes. Okay. Andrew from Yelp. I was just wondering, kind of conceptually at a higher level, what you see, I guess all of you to some extent, as the longer-term future for AMP. I know we've started covering some of that here today, and we've started talking about progressive web apps a little bit and how those can kind of tie together. And I've seen some previous talks where AMP is kind of an initial page view, and then progressive web apps take over from there. But that's obviously assuming that everybody implements PWAs correctly, that iOS picks up support for it, et cetera. So I'm curious, are you kind of hoping that all pages become, either AMP pages or equivalently fast? Is this kind of an initial page view experience and then hoping PWAs are going to take over from there? How does it play with kind of mobile apps and stuff as well? And just kind of at a high level, like what the overall intent is longer term?
Yes. Those were the first three questions.
Maybe I'll add a little more color to that. Regarding AMP and PWA, I think you described one pattern, which is where the AMP can be the initial page view and kind of bootstrap a PWA, and it would take over from there. But to me, the most exciting pattern in AMP is actually, with PWA, is the combination, where AMP is the thing that starts fast, and can even boot your service worker up. And then once you're inside the app shell, when your PWA is loaded, your app can actually load those same AMP pages. So really the promise behind AMP was that we wanted to make a format together with the publishers in the tech industry, all coming together to create something that would work really well for embedded mobile application use. Because it's not the case today that everybody just opens the browser on their phone and browses the web. Every app on your phone has kind of got its own browser sort of inside, right? They're all showing content of another form, whether it's your own application that you've made that has embedded web view, or you're opening something inside Chrome Custom Tabs, or it's Facebook, or it's LinkedIn, or something. That's how users use the web today on the phone. And we wanted to make it easy for publishers to publish content that would work reliably fast in all of these environments where they could control the monetization and the look and feel and the content without a lot of weird policies, without having to strike deals with everybody, just create an ecosystem where it would just work. And something where the publishers would benefit, but the platforms that are doing the distribution or these apps, including even your own apps, could rely on it, could rely on something with this that passes validation from AMP is safe to embed, that it's not going to be able to do anything weird, it's not going to be able to hijack the phone and run away, and it's going to perform very fast and feel fast. It's kind of something that users deserve when they're using your app and they're playing with your native content, whether it's a post inside LinkedIn or something. When they click on a link, they want the links to be as fast as the native content. And there's really no technical reason why that can't be done. It was just very hard to do well, and hard to do well at scale in a way that everybody could agree with, which is why I'm super excited that we all came together as an industry to help solve this problem. And that's how we view AMP. It's an embedded content format, and that could be embedded in your own app or in your own website, which might just be a PWA.
In fact, I should point out, when we started the effort and were canvassing publishers and different stakeholders around the world, one of the things that came back to us, particularly from publishers, was help us figure out how we can serve these different audiences on different devices, different OSs, in a far more efficient fashion, so that we can focus on creating exciting new features for our users, not simply replicating functionality from OS to OS, device to device, right? So we knew that was where we wanted to be. Obviously, it takes time to get there. And I thought it was particularly exciting when we hear things today about building canonical pages and canonical sites with AMP, that we're starting down that road.
All right, then we'll move to the next question. This is, I feel like we have answered that before, but the question is there a way to identify our pages as AMP? And I'm not sure if identify means having the AMP logo or just using AMP, but which aren't hosted by the Google AMP cache, because they like to have control via their own CDN.
Nothing is hosted by the Google AMP cache. It is a cache. It's part of the serving infrastructure of the way Google serves this content. It's hosted by you or your own CDN of choice already. I think we answered it.
Yeah, I think the answer you actually gave earlier. So if you really want to do this, just make your pages invalid. We will not cache them. You don't get the badge. They're invalid. But it's a, definitely a way to do it.
I don't think we would encourage that, because we
would not encourage it.
We actually expect most of the AMP ecosystem will be enforcing validity, because we do want to have some kind of constant that if you're a platform, even if you're a non-Google platform, you want to be able to rely on the fact that the page is valid, because it has certain properties that come with that from a security perspective, from a performance perspective. I think if you don't want your pages to show up in Google, you can robot your pages out of Google. That's always fine to do as well.
Right, so please don't, but it's an option.
Sounds good.
So ours is not the only cache in the world at Google, and it certainly won't be the only cache. There'll be lots of them, and I expect all of them will enforce validity against the same open source validity standard.
All right, and then we'll move over to Lindsay.
Hi, Robin Glenn from Net-a-Porter. I just wanted to ask you about your rendering of web components on the server. I want to know if you're going to open that up natively, and if you've been working with a Polymer team.
There's a lot of echo, so I didn't understand the question.
Rendering our components for percent.
So we've definitely recently started extensively documenting everything our cache does in painstakingly detail. Which is because there's now more caches, and we want all of them to be as good as they can, so we just say what we're doing. Inherently, this type of stuff, in our side, it's very deeply integrated in Google's production serving stack, so it's, open sourcing is not always an option. This might actually be something, so I mean, what I would be interested in general is having something similar to mod PageSpeed. If some of you are familiar with that does similar optimizations when you're serving from your own server. It's definitely something that would be interesting to have in the future. It's not, this technique does not apply to Polymer directly, for example, because it relies on this bootstrapping phase of AMP where essentially every single web component of the page has the exact same behavior in that very initial step of the initialization, so that our server doesn't need to understand what AMP Twitter is, what AMP Pinterest is, and what AMP Bind is. It just needs to understand that if something says layout responsive and width equals 400, height 300, what to do in that case. So it's not that you can't make it generic, but you can extend it beyond the Google AMP cache.
Thanks.
All right, and then next one. How can we get real-time validation reports? How can we force recrawls once a problem has been fixed?
So I think we all recognize that real-time validation is actually very important. One of the things that we've launched is a developer tool where you can put in your URL and we'll go and fetch it and we'll run the validator. We'll run the same validator that we run in Google Search to make sure that it's correct. And of course, you can always validate it yourself using the JavaScript console and when you're doing development. And there's even a Chrome extension that's been written that you can just browse AMP pages and it'll validate them on the fly. But overall, at Google, we want the pages that we ingest from you to be able to give you feedback much faster than we do today. Today, the turnaround cycle for Search Console reports and for things like the structured data validation is much longer than we like. It's just a matter of scale. There's an awful lot of pages out there. You guys type really fast. So it takes us a lot of time to process, something we're continuing to work on to try to make this faster. But where possible, we're launching more things that are like single URL tools where you could pass in a URL and have it go and test it right there on the fly, so to shorten the development lifecycle. It won't give you the batch reports in real time because the crawl does take some time to perform. There are a lot of web pages out there. Additionally, telling us when there's something that's fixed and that you'd like to fix it, you'd like us to kind of recrawl and reping, that's also on our list of things that we're working on.
But I would still recommend to take the matter into your own hand. If you saw Natalia's talk earlier today, she was talking into how they use the AMP HTML-validator NPM module, both for continuous integration testing and monitoring of the production site. So I think actually getting that integrated in your alerting system is really what you want. Search Console, because it's driven by our crawling, is always going to be indeterministic in a way that if your business relies on this working, might not be the ideal way to do it.
All right, and then we have a question over here.
Yeah, sure. This is Juan from Marfil. My question is a little bit more business-oriented. When you guys launched AMP a year and a half ago or so, it was said, or at least I understood, that Twitter would be a big part of that, or at least involved a lot on that. And I don't see that happening anymore. Is there a reason for that?
So get the last part.
I think the question, I just want to repeat the question because it's a little hard to hear over here, was Twitter, what's up with that, yo?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I can't speak for other companies, but we do work with Twitter quite a bit, and they are an active member of the AMP partnership, and they have been since, as you mentioned, since the very beginning. They've launched support for AMP inside Twitter Moments today inside their product, and they're very happy with it. I do know that they've been running experiments to put Twitter support for AMP in the main feed more and more, and I expect that you'll probably hear some announcements from Twitter soon.
All right, then let's move on to the next Slido question. And I think those are a quite easy one to answer, hopefully. How long are AMP pages cached on Google, and how to, well, at least the second part is easy to answer, and how to invalidate them?
All right, where should I start? The general caching model is similar to the HTTP header called stale while revalidate. So what it means is the cache will always serve whatever it has for a given URL, and then in the background revalidate. So that means, especially if you have a relatively hot document that gets a lot of traffic, it continuously gets revalidated, and the users get something that has a high median freshness. This works really well for relatively popular content. So definitely, obviously, our heritage basically is a news space where articles get a lot of traffic for a short time and then very little traffic after when it becomes old news. But this doesn't work super well for basically long-tail content. And so that's the second part of the question: how can we update the cache? So there's already an API that we call update ping. If you just Google mcache update ping, you'll find it. This is currently being worked on quite extensively in terms of making it more scalable. So it was originally designed to basically support the use case of oh my God, we got a takedown request from a judge. We need to get rid of this document. Let's tell the mcache. So something that doesn't happen very often. But we're extending it so that you can ideally call it whenever you know that you have a fresh document because someone hits save on an edit box or whatever, right? Typically your system will know when it's publishing, and you'll be able to push it to the mcache. And we're doing this together with other cache providers, in particular Cloudflare. So the system is designed that in a way that will enable you to basically ping all the mcaches without having to talk to 15 different proprietary APIs.
All right. And we have a question over here.
Hi. What are your plans on the desktop? I understand AMP stands for mobile. I use a Chrome extension which renders an AMP page. And today's talk by Senthil has a lot to say about consistency of UI. People getting used to 5G don't want to go back to 4G. So if I'm serving an AMP page, I'm setting a certain performance and a UI experience. I want to mirror that on the desktop, right? As much as possible. I mean, who doesn't want fast? Who doesn't want all the goodness it brings? So anything on that?
Yeah. So of course, AMP works on the desktop just fine. The AMP project website is lovingly crafted by our folks here. Works wonderfully on the desktop. AMP supports responsive design, so it can fit on all these different form factors. Not every publisher is publishing it in that way, though. We see, as you said, you browse the web with your Chrome extension. I'm sure you see lots of content that is a tiny little sliver in the middle of a big page. So I don't think most publishers are intending it to be accelerated desktop pages versus accelerated mobile pages. So it's unlikely that Google, I think the question is really directed at Google because from an AMP perspective, it of course works if you do it this way. I don't think Google will probably be launching on the desktop anytime soon. Most of the issues that AMP addresses, I think it does scale up beautifully to the desktop. Obviously, if it's designed around a terrible environment, it works really, really well in a good environment. But most of the issues are a lot less acute on the desktop than they are on the phone.
And I was going to add to that. I think, at least on the AMP side, as Bez was saying, AMP supports responsive design, so you should be able to build a desktop experience nicely in AMP. And I think, one of the things we're interested to get feedback on is, how could we be supporting desktop better? Are there challenges to getting, a desktop experience on AMP nicely set up? Are there interesting ad configurations that need to be thought through because you want to vary how you serve ads on desktop versus mobile? And to Richard's point earlier, I think this is all really critical to start solving as we sort of as it becomes more interesting to think about AMP as a format you can adopt for canonical pages. And so, folks who are going down that path or contemplating going down that path, get in touch with us on GitHub and let us know where the pain points are and what new features or things we should be doing differently.
Yeah, and without revealing any names of the innocent or guilty, there are several companies that have talked to us already about using AMP as their only format for publishing on the web, desktop, and mobile. So I think there's definitely some interest out there, and if you're one of them, please reach out to us if you're having issues.
In fact, I was at a conference a while back, and I was approached by a publisher of a newspaper in Lahore, Pakistan, who had already done this. Right? He had rebuilt his sites for desktop and mobile entirely with AMP. They're largely a 2G environment. And he was extraordinarily pleased with the result. And obviously, that wasn't because we reached out to publishers in Lahore, Pakistan. Our reach isn't quite that far. So clearly, it can work for folks if their own situation warrants it at this stage. And clearly, we're encouraging people to go in that direction.
That's a good answer. Thank you. And then next one. This is also an interesting, specific one. So is there a way to handle captchas coming to form?
Yeah, we got in touch with the team. It's getting looked at, and it's being worked on and investigated.
Okay, great. And then next audience question over here.
Hello? Okay. Question for y'all. more like a clarification question, because Paul, I've seen you in your blog mention this. You've also mentioned it in passing today. With all the consumer-facing tools that Google has that measure speed, like GA and you know, page speed insights and all this, why is it that you say that you guys can't determine what the speed is of a page if it's not AMP?
I don't think anyone said we can't determine what the page speed is if it's not AMP. We certainly can't guarantee a bound without AMP. So what makes AMP really, really fast inside search isn't some magic pixie dust, it's pre-rendering. It's just that simple, right? And in order to get pre-rendering, the server has to, or the page has to be able to talk to the document, which means all the documents have to have a shared understanding of how pre-rendering works and a shared communication path to and from the host viewer. To make that work, we have to have just basically a standard, and there is no other standard that is out there today. We're super open to these things being developed. If there were some really great alternative standards that made this kind of stuff work in a real good way, we would use them too. But we needed something because we want the page to be able to load it instantly. And that's really not going to happen if we have to make any network requests off to anybody, right?
So just for my understanding, because I just may not get this, it sounds like what you're saying is that, you know, I could follow the critical rendering path, I can pre-render and all that as well and be just as fast, but what you're saying is there's no way for you to verify that unless...
Actually, you can't do pre-rendering on Google surfaces without Google knowing what you're doing. That's the point. Like somebody on the platform side, whether it's Google or LinkedIn or anybody, whoever's going to do pre-rendering needs to know that you support a certain protocol for enabling pre-rendering, that you have certain guarantees that when they call you this way that you're not going to do weird, bad things, which means there needs to be a validator to ensure this because HTML is pretty open, right? It needs to know that you conform to this specification, and they need to have a shared specification so there's enough mass for them to bother writing something that can talk to a bunch of documents. And that's all AMP is. It's just one implementation of that.
And just one extra clarification, because I think this is kind of asked in the question often comes up, like, why don't we just make speed a ranking factor, and you know, AMP would just participate in this? And I mean, I actually, like in my role as, you know, tech lead of AMP, I would say, and I actually, you know, yell at the search people all the time. It's like, yes, finally do this, right? And I think, I mean, it would be amazing, and AMP would just be like one of the fast pages, right? It would do well in this context. It's something that can be done. I think when you look at the web from like 2 years ago, there was not much fast to rank on. Like it was all in.
So I think there's different questions here about whether something, how do we treat it inside search, from like whether we can pre-render it and open it with, and whether it has a lightning bolt, and whether it's a ranking factor. AMP itself is not a ranking factor at all today, so it's not like it's getting a ranking boost because there is no ranking factor for AMP. Speed is very important to us, and we do measure speed when we do things. It turns out speed is very hard to measure, as you alluded to, because ultimately the speed of how fast Googlebot pulled your content is not that important. What matters is how fast the users can pull your content, and that's highly variable. It depends a lot on the usage patterns of your content, but it also depends on your origin server's performance. Most servers on the internet that we see have very high variability on latency. You know, it's often people will talk about the Google cache and say somebody's origin server is faster than the Google cache. But that actually can be very well true. Google servers are not the world's fastest servers, but they tend to be the least variable. So they have a very low latency tail. Like it's very predictable, the performance. Whereas that's generally not the case on origin servers. There's wild variation across the internet when you load things. So if we are going to measure speed in a way that we can reliably, influence ranking at scale for users, we really want to know how users are really seeing the pages, because that's ultimately what matters. So these are the kinds of things we worry about.
I just got one more thing because you made me think of something else. So you said that, no, seriously, you said something to the effect of, Google makes the determination of what's pre-rendered. Is that accurate? Because you said I can't do it, you guys make that determination.
No, so you on your site can do whatever you want.
No, I know, but I get it. I mean, for
on Google
search,
itself. we determine what we're going to pre-render on Google search, and that's right now determined only by a technical consideration, which is we need to support a thing that we can reliably talk to, and there's only one thing in the world, which is the conference we're at.
And I explained earlier, especially the privacy aspect is really the key beyond all, like, yeah, you need the API and there's a lot of stuff, but the privacy aspect which again is that the pre-rendered page cannot know it's being pre-rendered until it's actually shown to user, has to be maintained, and that means we cannot fetch the pre-rendered page from your server because you would know IP address X wanted this, right? And that would not be something that users would be comfortable with. So that's the primary reason here.
So AMP is a collective, right? So it's not something that's done by Google. It's done by publishers. It's done by lots of distribution partners, distribution platforms, technology integrators. And the reason it's a collective is in order to make all this stuff work, there needs to be a critical mass of pages out there that makes it worthwhile for Twitter to invest in something to show them in their stream, right? Because it takes work for them to build this kind of technology. They're not going to bother with all of that if there's 5 pages on the internet. And publishers don't want to have to reinvent their content for each person to invent a new format for pre-rendering, for example. So AMP is just an agreement by a bunch of different companies and publishers that, hey, this one looks like a pretty good idea. Let's work together on this. We can all kind of agree that if I publish this, it'll load really fast in all these environments, and the platforms can agree that if I see enough of these documents, it's worth me investing in building a pre-rendering stack. That's just a collaboration.
Yeah, so what my question was around pre-render is that, like you said, sometimes you guys do, from the SERP, pre-render that first result. Like, for instance, if I type in CNN, you'll see the pre-render for CNN.
So I'd like to interrupt quickly. I think we should give others a chance to answer more questions. But
we'll have a cocktail later. You and I will chat.
Absolutely. Yes, feel free to. And then there's a talk at 9:30, yes, from Rana, who will also talk a lot about those things. So please come to that talk as well. All right. Next question is, when is nap time? Now.
When is nap time? Now.
I think nap time, if I can answer that, is after the cocktail hour, after you all had lunch with each other, and then hopefully fall into bed to be really freshened up tomorrow for another great day of content, hopefully. So, all right. On a more serious note, next actual virtual question. A real question, but virtually. Does Google analyze AMP pages content differently than non-AMP pages?
Oh, no.
What do you mean by analyze is sort of the question.
Well,
during crawl for indexing?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably that person should be more specific.
So we'll virtually answer the virtual question.
We validated.
Yeah, so we do process them a little bit differently. As I said, the fact that it's AMP doesn't affect the ranking per se on AMP versus other documents on the page. But we do process it differently because we want to validate it. We want to ensure that it is an actual AMP document. And we need to show it a little bit different in results so that when users click on it, we can swap out the presence of a canonical with an AMP alternate if there's one provided. So we do know that it's an AMP document when we crawl it.
But we don't analyze the subject matter in a different way, if that was the implication of the question.
Yeah, fundamental indexing, it's a document.
Yeah. All right. Then we'll do another live question over here.
Hi, John from Condé Nast. So on a big part of SEO, right, is like Google said, the top 3 ranking factors is content, links, and rank brain, right? So when it comes to AMP, it changes the whole link sphere, right? In a way, slowly, right? Because people now start getting the AMP URLs, and people start linking to the AMP URLs instead of linking back to the site. So my question is 2 parts. 1, do you recommend AMP to AMP links within AMP pages to maintain user experience, or you don't recommend that? The second one is, do you attribute links back to the CDN for a specific page back to the actual page? Is it treated like a 301? Is it treated like another canonical page? How do you take links into the whole SEO ranking?
It's a very technical question that you asked. We worked very hard to make sure that AMP, at least on Google surfaces, and it's structured in this way that it would be the same for all search engines, doesn't impact your search ranking, so that signals forward. That's why we have a requirement in AMP for it to be a document, to be a valid document that has a canonical tag. The model is such that you can publish AMP either as a standalone canonical document, in which case it would point to itself as the canonical entry, or as an alternate form where there has to be a backlink to a canonical. And that's to ensure that wherever anybody who is applying any kind of matching logic across the web, and search engines do this obviously for ranking and for deduping and for lots of other reasons, that we can follow the chain and do the right thing. That's up to you.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, these are your pages. So I think if you want to link to the AMP page, you can go ahead and do that. But canonical works too. I think one area we'd like to do better is, the current behavior, at least as far as Google search is concerned, is you click on a link, no matter what link it's going, what kind of page it's going to, it'll pop out. And so, with AMP to AMP linking, in pre-rendering, there's optimization, there's headroom there to make a better experience. And so that's something like we would like to look at going forward.
So one of the things that
we're having a secret conversation over my mic.
I see. That's never happened before. By all means.
Well, yeah. So I worked in search ranking. So AMP to AMP linking should be driven by user experience, not by SEO considerations. And search ranking has a system that finds equivalent links, equivalent URLs, independent of AMP. So sometimes, for example, someone may be creating different URL fragments, but they all point to the same thing. So we actually have a system that recognizes these three URLs are the same and add up the points that they're gathering from different visits or different inbound links. So the same sort of concept should apply to AMP pages too.
So one of the things that Cloudflare's launched recently is part of their CDN for just normal content delivery, is they will be able to look at the documents links that are on there and be able to do URL replacement for an AMP version for their customers, and something a publisher can turn on with Cloudflare. I think that's actually very clever, and I think something like that is really a great option for publishers if they do want to have automatic amplification of all of their outbound traffic links.
One additional word of advice too. So, I've thought about this, and one thing you should watch out for is sometimes publishers won't publish if they have a canonical and an AMP page. Sometimes there isn't an AMP equivalent for the canonical. And so when you're setting up an AMP to AMP linking scheme, you have to make sure that you handle it correctly, so you're not inadvertently linking to pages that don't exist in Rule 404 on the user. That's not good for you. It's not good for the user. So just be careful with that kind of thing too.
All right. I think we'll just take another live question because we have a few people waiting.
Hello. Hello. Yeah, is it working? Okay. Hi. I'm from the publisher side, and it happens that the demographic of my sites are pretty young and tech savvy. So quick pages is kind of the status quo at this point with them. That also requires us to be more creative with our storytelling, because now we have Snapchat and all those examples. So aside from the publishers being more creative with how we're putting our content together, do you guys have anything coming down your pipeline, even high-level Sky in the Pie in the Sky, that one, ideas that you guys are putting together for elevated or changing storytelling techniques?
Short answer is yes, we do.
Prepared to elaborate a little.
And I'll give you a slightly longer answer.
Oh, I see. Okay, fine.
No, we do see a need and an opportunity in market for obviously evolutions in storytelling. And we clearly would like to help stimulate and enable that. And we do think AMP gives us a pretty strong opportunity to not only work with others to explore those possibilities, but then create the underlying behaviors and templates and so on that can really help the ecosystem adopt them. Because one concern that we have, and that I think others have had, is experimentation with storytelling formats is expensive, hard to learn, and we think that's where we can step in and provide some assistance. So that's one of the things that we're working on, and we'll be talking more about as we get down the road.
All right, thank you. There's another question here, which is, I guess, another one for Vamsi, and another really highly specific ad question. You say 85% of AMP pubs see higher CPMs, but that's misleading. We see higher CPMs from ad X. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, AMP versus mobile web, but not higher overall CPMs. Where's header bidding?
So I want to jump in on that as well. We obviously, it's important to us to understand where publishers are around the world and their implementations with AMP, particularly with regard to monetization. So we talked to hundreds of them. And the results of that 85% came from that survey. Obviously, there are variations within that. And it could be variations of one ad network is performing differently from another. The one significant variation we've seen is with publishers is how much have they invested in fully implementing their monetization capabilities within the AMP pages versus the non-AMP pages. And we're seeing great progress there. But of course, at core here, as you point out with header bidding, is that we're swapping out the engines on a jet in flight and trying to unbreak the ads ecosystem, as Malta puts it. So one of the reasons why we have these discussions is what capabilities are missing, what ad networks are missing, how do we make sure they're properly supported. Now, let's get to header bidding. One of the core philosophies behind AMP was let's make sure that every component is responsible for its own performance, right? And that's a big problem with web pages today, where one, as I've often said, the road to performance hell was paved by the request one more line of JavaScript, because you just don't ever know what's going to happen after that line. Header bidding obviously falls into that in the sense that it loads in the header and it can degrade page performance. What we are seeing is ad networks begin to develop, in a sense, the alternative, which is dynamic bidding, right? So header bidding is dynamic bidding triggered in the header. So let's support dynamic bidding, but do it within the confines of the architecture and against the principles where it's responsible for its own performance. And there are some ad networks that are already supporting dynamic bidding.
Yeah, just to add some interesting technical tidbits. So one of the big bad things with ads on the web is that they're really slow to get an ad, because ad servers are have to do these auctions where they talk to other people, so that takes a while. And so you want to make that request as early as you can. But then the rendering is really expensive on the client side. And so you want, and you now have two conflicting things. You want to request as early as possible, but you want to render as late as possible. And right now the request has a side effect of rendering, which is really bad. And so AMP ads can take this apart. And we're actually doing something that I would call actual header bidding, where we make the ad request as early as we can, but then we render the ad as late as we can, or never, for example, if you never scroll to the right position. And so I think that is actually the right way to do it. I think one of our core founding principles is to make decisions based on user experience and not based on what is the easiest to develop. So header bidding is a hack to get stuff working that is great for monetization, but is doing it while reducing user experience. So the right way to do it is to do these requests on the back end. That requires obviously all these parties to talk to each other, but it's not right to always just get the easy way out and say we'll do it on the client side through that 500 millisecond latency that the user has. So that's really our idea, to finally get all the parties involved to talk to each other in the back end and solve the problem there.
By the way, tomorrow, Vamsi will be doing a session on AMP ads, and it's really exciting for all the reasons I think we've talked about technically. But just keep in mind one thing. One beauty of it is that AMP ads can work anywhere. So AMP ads can work in non-AMP pages. And so if we're talking about really driving ecosystem change, unbreak advertising, drive those markets, that's really, really an important step forward.
All right. Do you want to add anything? But you have plenty of time to talk about it tomorrow. So, all right. Then we do another live question over here.
Hi, my name is Sumo from 100 Flowers. Question was, since checkout won't be AMP compatible, there may be some domain switching or subdomain switching within the same session. I'm curious to know how you advise retailers to measure conversion performance, whether it's in GA for organic search and for AdWords for paid search, especially since retailers are considering to send paid traffic. Just want to understand what you guys are thinking about that. And secondly, have you come across any instances where anybody's using AMP as a direct load experience?
Yeah, I can. Okay, yeah. So there's a couple solutions we have in mind. It depends on exactly how you want to, like, what use case you're targeting. But specifically on like the product detail pages that we're really trying to get working in AMP with e-commerce, we've introduced some features recently that enable like a form submission to transmit the client ID through on the form request. So that's one way that you can actually have the AMP side sort of identifier combined with an identifier that you might have on the other side. And so, I mean, obviously, that's a very straightforward way of tracking conversion. We also support a similar thing, I think we mentioned earlier, on linking. So in situations where the user is moving between the contexts, but it's all sort of one path, one continuous path, I think these kinds of conversion scenarios will be much easier. There's other kinds of conversion tracking that'll happen. Like you might come back many weeks later, and so we're working to figure out solutions for how we can make the right calls to be able to track those.
And specifically on AdWords conversion tracking, that in the current setup, that is just going to work. That's should be super simple, and so also supported in AMP, but you probably don't even need it there because your conversion event won't happen there. The Google Analytics-based conversion tracking based on this magic GCLID parameter that you might be familiar with is suffering from the same issue that I was mentioning earlier, where you have separate properties, and so you might not be able to attribute the conversion at the right spot. But this is like something where like obviously I know this answer because I looked into how to fix it.
All right. I'm going to fire off 3 questions from this one. I'm just going to try to answer with 1 word each. And you can add 2 more if you want to. When will AMP work in Gmail? Don't know. Can we use AMP as mobile site? Yes. Where do I get an AMP t-shirt and hoodie? When you become a speaker at AmpConf. Do you want to add anything? OK. Then I'd like to, we only have 2 and a bit minutes left, so I want to definitely hear what Dan has to say with this question.
Thank you. Dan Callahan from Mozilla. You said that AMP is not a factor in search ranking. Is it possible for a page to rank above or alongside the top stories carousel without using AMP?
I'll take that since I work on top stories. So the top stories block, if you look at it today, there's a couple of cases where there's 1 or 2 like links above the carousel, and those we called feature articles, and they rank higher for some other reasons. So the carousel has a bunch of signals that go into it that probably you guys can guess, such as freshness, popularity, how good the content is, and those featured articles, they can be AMP or non-AMP, and they're in the top stories block above the carousel for that reason, because they may be AMP or non-AMP, but they actually rank higher. So answer to that question is yes.
I think one good example is whenever there's news about Facebook and you Google Facebook, Facebook.com will still be the first link because most likely you want to go to Facebook. But the 500 news articles about Mark Zuckerberg's next post is below it. So it definitely can rank below.
The last thing to say about that is also that the search results page is trying to answer a bunch of user intents. So whatever best serves that user intent, that result is what ranks higher. And whether that's the top stories carousel is not always true, such as in the Facebook case. So.
All right, and I think we're right on time. We're going to free it up. Do you want to have another question? Or do you want to free up another minute so that people can jump to cocktail hour?
Yeah.
Let's see. I think we can't clear another question in that time. The other ones are pretty complicated. So please feel free to talk to the team afterwards during the cocktail hour. Please stay for the cocktail hour. We have a live DJ here. It's going to be fun. And then just a few words before I leave you. You can check your luggage tomorrow if you want to. Please bring your badge that you got today because otherwise it will be difficult to get in again. And that's about it. All right, thanks everyone.